Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Analyzing Finance with Nick live stream. I just got back from New York a few days ago and we had a great meetup out there. And next will be Atlanta on Thursday. And we already have a good crowd expected to come. And I look forward to meeting you guys all in Atlanta on Thursday. And then we're also going to be in Chicago on Saturday. And then the following Thursday, the 30th, we will be in Dallas. But let's get on to what we're going to actually talk about on today's live stream, which is nostalgia, the economics of nostalgia in particular. Like, what makes people nostalgic? Why do particularly millennials and Gen Z just like dream about the halcyon days of the 1990s or the 1980s? Um, what's it called? Um, that is my question really for this live stream. And basically, how these will go is that, like, similar to all my more recent live stream formats, is I will do my lecture series to start and talk about the main topic, which is the economics of nostalgia, and then I'll answer questions in the Q&A section after our main focus of conversation. If you want to make sure that your question is answered, please leave a super chat, because I get a lot of comments on these chats and there's a good chance I will miss yours. So even though I want to answer as many as I can, but without further ado, let's get to the core focus. Um, Basically, like, why is nostalgia so popular? Why do younger generations long for a past that was only in their childhood, or many times happened even before they were born? Well, there's a few reasons for it. One, nostalgia is generally correlated with depression and negative class mobility. Those whose lives are generally getting better are not focused on the past. Like, it's a common trope, like, to hear like some older person say, "Oh, back in the good old days." And why are they talking about the good old days all the time when they're the world is actually a pretty good place to live despite a lot of our social problems? I'm not denying the cost of living crisis or any of those things that plague our modern society. But in general, we live in an era of absolute and relative prosperity currently, especially if you are in a developed economy right now. But there, at the same time, it doesn't feel that way because the level of downward social mobility feels a lot higher, and in many cases is higher than in the past. Um, you have things such as the internet, AI, globalization, and a variety of macroeconomic forces that work as a double edged sword. On one hand, it allows more entrepreneurial people and those with a international or national market to sell their product or services to tap into a much bigger customer base and scale a lot quicker now at any time. And also with a lot of the technological developments, you have the ability to reach more people faster than ever before. Like, the biggest examples in the content and entertainment world, like 100 years ago, an entertainer could only do a show for the 100 to 200 people that show up to the comedy club that night in New York City. Um, and therefore, the living is limited to this ticket sales net of what he has to pay the club owner to show up. Whereas today, that same person can post a video on YouTube and have millions of people watching. But the downside really is that it's a winner take all. And if you're not one of those people who can draw hundreds of thousands or millions of views, you're not going to make a living as a creative anymore. And that's the most extreme example, but you have this across the economy, and it can be very depressing. But this isn't just an era of a product of globalization in modern time. Like this nostalgia thing is a common theme throughout history. Like during the Great Depression, you had a lot of nostalgia for the late Victorian and early Edwardian era, in terms of like popular culture items and in movies and in entertainment, um, etc. And you had the same thing in the 1970s, which is the closest economic era to what we're going through right now. I kind of think of the current era as like a very light version of what happened in the 1970s, and for a variety of reasons, which I could possibly do in another live stream as that topic. But when it comes to, um, sorry, I lost my train of thought. All right, when it comes to nostalgia in the 1970s, you had a lot of nostalgia for the 1950s, particularly because that was considered like the halcyon golden era that people look back to. It was a good time in economic history, don't get me wrong. And same with the early Edwardian era too, was also a good economic era, and that's why you had Great Depression era nostalgia for that period. But like, and so as a result, you saw a lot of remembrance and a lot of interest in 1950s popular culture or 1950s um, style and aesthetic in the 70s. Example would be like, this is when the movie Grease came out. This is when the movie American Graffiti came out, which were like two movies about what it was like being a youth in the 1950s. This is when a lot of the 50s style diner chains started to get popular in the 70s and the 80s, like places such as Ruby's or Johnny Rockets. So that was one era. And then you have in the last era, in the 2010s, when people were struggling, especially in the wake of the '08 crisis, you had a lot of nostalgia for the 1980s, which was also a boom time. And I did actually a video about the history of economic booms because you get a lot of content out there about what went wrong in various eras of economic history. Like, what were the stories of the busts? But you really never see the stories about good economies and what caused things to actually do better than expected or hoped for. Um, an example would be like, again, in the 1980s, there was no guarantee the 80s would be as prosperous as they were, but there were several things that happened in that era which led to a more prosperous time. And here's the video that I did about the 1980s and basically how they had an economic boom. And I also did one similar video about the 1990s and their economic boom. And so they got a lot of 80s nostalgia in the 2010s when millennials were starting their careers in the wake of the financial crisis and were struggling a lot. Examples of that were like hoverboards, if you guys remember those little roller wheeler things that you can control only with your feet. Pepsi redoing its logo to look like more like it did in Back to the Future 2. And just in general, a lot of 80s fashion and music getting a little bit of a second wind. And then now this generation, it's the 1990s is the nostalgia that everybody's looking. Stranger Things, that's also a good example of 80s nostalgia in the 2010s. And now here in 2020s, it's the 1990s. And it's not a coincidence that it's usually about 30 years before is when the nostalgia usually happens, like 25 to 30 years before whatever the current era is. And I think that's long enough so that people who are young adults now or middle age now go back to their childhood memories. And so, and also it happens to be also the same time as the last economic boom. So the example really for this would be the 1990s nostalgia, like teal and purple coming back into fashion, neon colors in many places coming back into fashion. You have also the revival interest in things like Pokemon cards and collecting those, Nintendo 64. jean jackets, etc. And all of these were like the last three ages of the economy. Like example, you don't really see that much nostalgia for the 60s or the 70s outside of a few boomers who are more progressive leaning, because the 60s and the 70s were generally a time of social instability and economic struggles and high inflation. And those weren't really good times that people think, oh man, it was really great to live through the 60s and the 70s beyond like a few niche circles. And it's the same thing. Like you're not going to really see that much nostalgia probably for the 2000s either, because the 2000s were kind of a fake good economy in a lot of ways. So so these come in waves, and the empirical research on this subject suggests that nostalgia rises noticeably when people are experiencing declining life satisfaction, loss in class or social status, and perceived downward mobility. And nostalgia kind of serves as a way for people to kind of cope with these issues. And speaking of my economic boom series, if you guys would like me to bring that back, let me know in the comments. And if you do want me to bring it back, what's like a country and an era that you would want me to discuss in the economic boom series? Like an example that I looked at considering doing was like Japan in the 1980s, the US in the 50s, or the whole world in the period of 1870 to 1913. But it is something that you guys didn't seem to catch on to last time I went around that subject, but it might be something worth going into again. But back to nostalgia. Basically, there's research from the University of Southampton, the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, and Lemoyne College that basically shows that there is a statistically significant correlation between nostalgia and feelings and when people experience loneliness, boredom, or existential threat to their lifestyle. It's kind of a way that it's like, look, maybe my life is tough right now, but I can emotionally stabilize myself by remembering a time that it was better and hoping that we can bring a repeat of that back. And higher nostalgia also correlates with just anxiety and sadness, but not necessarily clinically depression. I think it's usually a product of people not feeling satisfied and happy with their life. And I noticed it kind of intuitively, even in my own life, in times when I was really struggling, especially at the early days of growing my business. I felt more nostalgic for periods in my youth, or when I had social issues when I was a teenager. I had a lot of nostalgia for my childhood. And I don't think I'm really the only one who really felt this way at the time. And I think that it serves as like a psychological defense for like a time that you're going through a lot of loss. Um, and it does kind of correlate with perceived downward mobility. Like you see like a lot of these social trends for nostalgia, and it's more visible on social media, but it's during times of declining real wages, loss of local industry if you're in an area that's been hollowed out, such as the Rust Belt, or perceived cultural displacement for a variety of reasons. That's why a lot of nostalgic movements often correlate with nationalist political movements or more radical populist political movements to a certain degree. Um, the other really thing is that people think that times are necessarily hard right now. And not just because maybe they actually are hard right now, but the maybe the reason why it's perceived that the economy feels a lot worse than it actually is a couple of them. One, I'm going to get into in the video that I'm come out on Sunday. I've already released it for members, but it's when I talk about my alternative CPI data and how the inflation number is likely a lot higher, not like the shadow stats level bad, but like in a decent margin higher than what the government numbers are. So that over like a 20 to 30 year period of compounding, people's purchase power loss is probably higher than what statistics indicate. And so therefore, like that might be a root source of why things feel like they're worse than what economic data says. But beyond that, the other thing is that this is the era of social media. This is the first time when a large chunk of the middle and lower classes really had a public voice. Um, because in the era in the past, whether it was like in television and radio and print media, if you didn't really work in those professions, it was generally people who either had the money to buy advertisements or people in a certain class who could afford to work in that field for lower pay sustainably were the only ones who really had voices. And social media has given everybody a voice, um, in every social class for the first time. And people in like the precariat classes and or below have always really struggled, but they never really had a chance to express it. And now they do have a chance to express it. And so, as a product of that, you see a lot of more economic dissatisfaction is way more visible. And it's probably had, like, there were people who were struggling in the 80s and the 90s and the 50s, but for either institutional political reasons or technological limitations or educational reasons or a variety of other things, these people just did never had a chance to express their grievances. And now they do. So as a result, um, you have a lot more negative voices out there than you would otherwise. And then um, the back to the other data that correlates with this is that the places that have the most nostalgia are the places with the greatest amount of hollowing out of their local industries. Um, okay, super chat. What was the hardest years for you and your family growing up financially, and why? The hardest years for me in my life were when I was in middle school, particularly the ages of like 13 to 17 were the most difficult points in my life. And the reason was is that as somebody who had very below average social skills for a variety of reasons, really struggled in a point where most young people have issues with that kind of thing, but it was magnified for me. Um, and on top of that, there was some turmoil going on with my family at the time, and the recession of '01 had an impact on my family's finances. And so as a result, that was probably the toughest time in my memory. The other time was when I graduated from college. It was shortly after the great financial crisis, and quality jobs, especially in the fields that I wanted, were hard to find. And my pay was relatively low, and the cost of living was high. I think probably on the net in my first job, I probably on the net after taxes and living expenses and moving costs lost money. It was a brutal time as well. But those, if I had to pick the toughest times in my life, were my early teens and my early 20s. Um, but and that's the other kind of thing to like point a picture. Like I've looked at all of my adult years basically from 18 to present, and I've had one third of them have been just bad years, and one third of them have been really good years, and one third of them have been kind of in the middle. But my overall life trajectory has been very positive, despite one out of every 3 years of my life would have been considered a bad year with a major economic or personal setback. And the way I say that is like because, and the way you have to look at it is that every year that you have in the future will be your best year. Even if it's you're going through hard times right now, you have to go through it. That every year is going to be just on January 1. Is you have to work at it as if every year is going to be the best year of your life. And you might be wrong sometimes, but and it's not assuming like you're under 80 years old, the best year of your life is probably ahead of time. There's actually a lot of correlations between age and life satisfaction. It's kind of a U-shaped curve. Like you're very happy when you're in your early childhood ages, and then your peak level of misery is like in either like in your teens and 20s, sometimes in 30s and 40s if you had a happy high school and college era, and then happiness starts to go back up again in middle age. So, and then keeps going the older you get. So that might also be like a lot of people who are, again, the people most yearning for nostalgia tend to be people in their 20s, 30s, and maybe 40s. And they're going through that bottom of that U-shaped curve of life satisfaction. So that's kind of another element really to this. And generally, the studies, though, consistently all find that economic insecurity leads to nostalgia for earlier periods of economic stabilities or economic booms. And I've already used the example of like the 1970s, where you had shows like Happy Days, movies like Grease, and all the 1950s diners popping up all over the country. Like in Russia, after the Soviet Union fell in the 1990s, you had a lot of nostalgia for the Soviet Union, even though objectively the Soviet Union's economy was greatly underperforming the Western economies. But in times of the 1990s were a really hard time for Russia, so a lot of people developed nostalgia for an era that just felt more stable. Another example, again, what I mentioned is post 2008 in Western countries, when you started to get a little nostalgia originally for the 1980s, and now more recently post pandemic for the 1990s. And when it comes to the whole class mobility specifically thing, is that US upward mobility in some metrics has fallen a lot since the 1980s. Millennials in general, compared to their parents, it's no longer a guarantee that they're going to have a better quality of life on economic metrics. Like in 1980, if you were born in 1955, there was probably an 80% chance that you in 1980 or 1985 had a higher inflation adjusted income and living standard than your parents did at 30 years old. Whereas the 30-year-old in 2015, there was only a 50-50 chance that they had a higher standard of living than their parents did in 1985. And same thing now, 2025, you probably have if you're a Gen Zer who's about to turn 30 in 2025 or a late millennial, there's only a 50-50 chance that you have a higher GDP per capita or living standard than your parents did in 1995. And so the fact that upward social mobility feels like a coin flip is what's making people have some sort of longing for nostalgia. But I'm a little bit more optimistic on this. I think that the millennials just kind of got stuck being a sandwich generation that has to pay for all the political and economic mistakes of the boomers. And they will have a harder life on average than, say, Gen X or their parents. But I think starting with Gen Z and definitely with generations after that are going to have a much easier and better life than millennials do, and even arguably better than X's and boomers do too, because the lower population from lower birth rates is going to mean less competition for things such as college admissions, such as housing, such as jobs. I mean, there'll be AI as a threat for jobs, but in general, you're going to have a less competitive market for a lot of things because a lot of people have just given up on the idea of having families. And the most prosperous generation really in American history isn't even the boomers. It's the generation before them. It's the silent generation, people born during the Great Depression from 1929 to 1946, because they were much smaller in size than the generation before and after them, because a lot of people just didn't want to have families or could not, for economic reasons, have families during the Great Depression. And they were able to catch the wave of the baby boom behind them. They were the ones who were able to sell products and services to them, or be their hiring managers, or just be a little bit ahead of, or get the degrees before they got too competitive and all this other stuff. And so as a result, I think anybody who was born between say 2008 and 2025 is probably going to have a very prosperous life, way better than I think than people expect because a similar dynamic is going on that one happened back then. Uh, but back to nostalgia, the other thing really is that um, when it comes to nostalgia, um, it's also there's two real types of it. There's cultural nostalgia and personal nostalgia. Personal nostalgia is memories of youth, memories of your friendships and relationships and childhood. And it's common really in all society. Like there's the stereotype of kids who peaked in high school for a reason. And usually this personal nostalgia is a reflection of personal stagnation or going through a tough time currently, or just a product of age, especially if you're over like 75, because you'll look back and your journey of life and be like, look, I did a lot of interesting and cool things. And maybe the best, maybe I have less years ahead of me than behind me, but I look back and remember. Maybe it's why people are also happier. I think that might be a more healthy kind of nostalgia, is looking back at the things you actually did and made a difference. And then societal nostalgia is belief that society as a whole was a better in the past. This is the one that more translates to politics. And it's not really all conservatism is nostalgia. Like I personally have a lot of right of center views in my politics, but they're not based on reviving some halcyon days that really never existed. Um, like you, for example, like the 50s, you hear a lot of time about in the 1950s about how families were a lot more stable in the 1950s than they are today, and that you had stay-at-home wives, and you can have some simple job and be able to support a family, and people cared about each other and sat at the dinner table and all that. But there were some other kind of trade-offs. Like one, your house was probably 900 square feet and you crammed all three of those kids into a single bedroom, and it wasn't made of the same quality of material and have a lot of the modern technological amenities that we take for granted today. The second thing is that the food you ate was much lower quality in the 50s than today. Like a lot of the TV dinners that even when I was younger in the 90s that people thought were like radioactive, that was kind of just like normal food that people ate back then. A lot more preservatives and things like that. Um, and so, uh, and it wouldn't taste very good either. Like, so, um, that's another real, and back then also like things like eating a steak was considered a high end luxury that only was saved for special occasions. And drinking orange juice was considered a luxury as late as the 50s too. Now, eat some things like eating steaks and drinking orange juice are kind of taken for granted today. Like, maybe I'm sounding a little out of touch, but I think like your average person eats a steak at least once a week, um, if not more. And whereas like, or some food that has steak as an ingredient. Whereas that wasn't really the case in the 1950s. Um, and so as a result, you can have very more conservative politics and not be stuck in nostalgia, because there are a lot of ideas that can be changed, that is radical change, but just not radical left wing change. Um, and another really example with this is the nostalgia, societal nostalgia really correlates a lot with when you have economic stagnation, when you have cultural displacement or job insecurity, especially like in the age of AI and increased immigration, has caused a lot of anxiety about what people's roles are in society, and political instability. And most debates about the politics of nostalgia are more for this cultural nostalgia more than the individual form of nostalgia. So that's kind of my take on this. And there's also a lot of democratization that people just generally don't give credit for. And for those who are not familiar with this, democratization is the opposite of progress. It's the idea of, because of technology or like the market economy making things more affordable, you allows more access to things that previously were only available for the rich. Like examples of that would be like air travel. Like air travel, the price of an plane ticket has gone down by over 40% adjusted for inflation since 2000, the year 2000. Yeah. And you have other things that have gotten a lot more affordable that people take for granted. Like a lot of stuff, apps that you have on your smartphone, you used to have to buy like an electronic to do every single one of these, whether it's a calculator, a flashlight. You have to buy the old Thomas Brother books or print out MapQuest. You have to buy a scanner instead of just taking a picture on your phone and using the Genius Scan app. Phone calls, international communication in general. You email instead of having to go to the post office and physically mail letters. Yeah. So those are examples of democratization, which I think are generally not getting a lot of credit. So now I got a question from KC Kool-Aid King. Thank you for the super chat. If you were suddenly tax czar of California, what tax policies would you eliminate? What would you implement? And how would you get major companies to stop leaving? How would you create an economic boom? Okay, I have a lot of opinions on California since California is my home state and I've lived here about 90% of my life. So, first thing I would do is I would cut the income tax by 50%. First of all, I'd get rid of the double digit brackets above 250K just right off the bat. Second, I would cut the top 9.9% rate down to 5% and just make it a flat 5% state income tax in California. That's step one. I would like to eliminate it entirely, but given the way public finances are in California, that's not really viable at the moment. And I have to go into the numbers on this, what's it called, about how to balance each of these things. But the way that I'd have to compensate for that is I would eliminate Prop 13 protection on property taxes and let all of the property taxes be reassessed to higher values or have some sort of maybe some grandfather clause or gradual thing so that a bunch of people all of a sudden don't get thrown out of their homes. But you would while you're phasing out the income tax, I would also be phasing out the repeal of phasing out Prop 13 protections at the same time. This would do it would basically redistribute money from established and retired people who own land to younger people who are earning income. And if you want to have businesses come and if you want younger people to stay in the state, you need to make that shift. Especially as AI makes it so that you're not going to have as much W-2 income to tax. The other thing is I would have some sort of capital gains provision in the California income tax code because right now there isn't one. But yeah, and the other thing to do is that you would have more generous use of mineral and oil rights. California has a wealth of natural resources. We have lots of oil, like shale oil in like the Bakersfield area. There's a lot of offshore oil all across Southern California. There's a lot of rare earth minerals in the high desert area. And there is a lot of agriculture and a lot of potential for natural resource exploitation. And we would have, I think you would have to open that up and have taxes on those mineral rights in order to help balance the sovereign debt issue. And the other thing too is I would reform CalPERS and the pension system. One, I think that in general for every state, I think the pension fund manager should be the highest paid employee in the state, because the problem is a lot of the government's finances is dependent on how good the returns are in the pension system. Yet most pension fund employees across the United States are much lower paid than their private sector equivalents on Wall Street. And so therefore, you're not going to get the best talent to manage some of the biggest pools of money in the entire economy. So I think I would change the way I would try to recruit better quality pension fund managers all across the board. This isn't just a California thing, this is a nationwide thing. I'd also I try to switch as many government employees as I could to defined contribution plans instead of defined benefits, because it's just the pension plans are designed in a way that, just due to longer life expectancies and the problem of public unions negotiating against politicians who have no incentive to be an adversarial opponent, led to benefits that cannot be paid. And then you'd also get rid of any benefits for illegal migrants entirely. And on top of that, you would also get rid of public unions so that public employees, you can't, because there's no fair negotiator. I'm fine with private unions because they have an adversarial management that has an incentive to keep costs down. And so they're equally batting heads against each other, where that's not the case in the public sector. Even progressives like Franklin Delano Roosevelt were opponents of public unions. And so that's kind of how I would reform California's economic structure. I'd cut a lot of public funds for things, particularly stuff that, and also the environmental deregulation. You have to allow more development, particularly in coastal areas where the people live, in terms of real estate and housing. And so, and I would get rid of Prop 13. I would cut the income tax, and I would allow natural resources to be extracted in California. And if the budget gets balanced, then any surpluses will be used to continue to phase out the income tax until hopefully we get to zero. But I don't know. That would probably be like a 20-year project to do all of this realistically. So hopefully that answers your question. It's probably not the most politically popular way I would go about doing it, but that's how I would do it. Now I got my super chat question, but I'm basically wrapped up with the nostalgia section of this live stream. So now is time for Q&A. So if you want to ask your questions, please ask them right now or leave a super chat. I will go through all of them. I'm going to announce some housekeeping for the channel before I get to Q&A. First thing I'd like to mention is the tour is continuing to go. We're starting with Thursday in Atlanta, Georgia. I will be in the South. And this is my first time I've ever actually been to the city of Atlanta. So that will be fun. The next time I'm going to be at an event is in Chicago on Saturday. We were in Chicago last June, and we're going to be there on April 25th. And then the next one we're going to be is Dallas on April 30th. We're also going to have a private dinner the night before on the 29th. And then the private dinners for Atlanta and Chicago are on the same day. And if you want to join us at the private curated dinners, feel free to apply. Via the link I just posted below. And then we're going to have a meetup in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm actually moving the meetup to the Missouri side instead of the Kansas side because there's more fun venues, I guess, over there for what I'm trying to do. Will be on Sunday, May 3rd. And then those are the last meetups we're going to have for about 3 months. But then I'm going to be going to Denver on the first week of August. The date is not entirely set yet, but I'll let you guys know when it is. But the date is set for when I'm coming to San Diego, which will be Saturday, September 12th. And then I'm also going to be back in Northern California in Santa Cruz on August 22nd. I just was in Toronto last week. Actually a week ago from today, I was in Toronto flying to Boston. So yeah, you missed the Toronto meetup. It was on the 9th of April. So it might be a while before I get back because I was literally there last week. But other things, if you want to vote on future cities to go to, we have like a form to do that. the most popular city, surprisingly, that people want me to do that is not on the list right now is Montreal, Quebec, and anywhere in the world. And then followed by that is Houston, Texas. So that is what's it called? My take on that. And then if you want to reach out to me for specific questions, whether it's about investing or anything really that's more direct, individualized, you can reach out to me via my consultation form, or you could schedule a call on my Calendly. I also, if you want to stay in touch with events so you don't miss out, like this guy in the chat who missed on Toronto, to keep touch on events or new videos or anything else that we're doing. I have a Substack where I have an email. You get emails for everything. So that's the link to that. And then I also have released all my short form content because I don't want to flood my YouTube feed with shorts on my X and Instagram and LinkedIn. And if you want to find the Instagram, here's the handle. And I posted a link to the X. And that is all for the announcements, except for one more, is that I am going to do an international tour in 2027 where we're going to go to Europe, South America, plus probably a few US and Canadian cities and maybe the Caribbean as well. I will post details on that, but they're going to be structured a little differently. So if you are a viewer of mine who lives outside of North America or even in North America, and you want to help me figure out how to find venues in these cities and organize it, your help will be appreciated. There will be Eventbrite pages that are released with no set date, just so I can get an idea of how many people want to come, because there's a much higher minimum amount of people that it makes sense to attend in order for me to host an event outside of North America. But that's something that we're doing. That's my question when it comes to, that's all my housekeeping announcements. So let's go to the questions. Where in Toronto did you visit? I mean, my hotel was in downtown, but my meetup was in Little Portugal, if you know where that is. And as somebody who is 25% Portuguese, it's a rare chance that I can get to have authentic Portuguese food in North America. And that's where we had our private dinner, was at this really good Portuguese restaurant there called Via Norte. I think I would go there again for the next private dinner. I really liked it. Why are real estate prices so low in the Hamptons and so high in Newport Beach? Well, I think because California has a lot of structural regulations that prevent development of real estate adjusted for population. That's why. Also, California has much lower property taxes than other states because of Prop 13 and other reasons. And the other thing is that when it comes to real estate taxes. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I mean, because it's a higher base price for the properties. Like, that's why that they have. But the thing is, California, in terms of tax rate for property taxes, is one of the lowest, actually. I think Hawaii is the only state with lower property taxes than California as a percentage basis, but I might be wrong on that. So that's my take on property taxes really in California. But California generally is more expensive than New York, Hamptons, because Hamptons also, people can't, they're not as functioning of economies in the off season. Like, you can live in Newport Beach all year. Newport Beach has a local prosperous economy, whereas like the Hamptons is mainly people's summer vacation homes, and in the winter it's kind of dead. So I think that has some impact on that as well. But yeah, is high gas prices a replay of summer 2008 looming recession? If the gas prices went to like 150 to 200 a barrel, you might have an argument, but we're under 90 right now on the crude per barrel, and the oil energy efficiency in America is much higher today than it was in 2007. Like, we just burn a lot less fuel per mile driven or per kilowatt of electricity. You have electric cars, you have more fuel efficient vehicles as a whole. And so as a result, and also the percentage of miles for commuting is under 50%, where it was over 50, well over 50% in 2007. So a lot more driving is discretionary. Um, so I'm not really as worried about that. Like, however, I think there's a lot of fragilities in the economy, and I think the risk of a minor recession is higher. And then just ask for questions. I can't answer any questions about specific stock market or market related things like predictions for asset prices or stock prices or my thoughts on that. If you want to know more about specific investments, schedule a time to talk with me directly. So let's see. Let's scroll back up to some of the questions that we had related to nostalgia. Why do you look down on skilled tradespeople? I don't know. Where did you get the idea that I look down on skilled tradespeople? I look down on people who um, try to not maximize their potential. And there are a lot of people who push people to work in the trades when they probably have potential to do other things. That's really the only comment that I've said. And some people are more suited for the trades, and some people are more academically gifted. And the generic advice among the conservative Inc. in America is that you should push everybody into the trades, no matter if they're a valedictorian who could get into Stanford versus somebody who's better with their hands than school. Um, I don't think that's what I push back against, not the idea of going to trades in general, but the fact that it's this new. It seems like in general, a lot of society needs to have these universal solutions, like we have to say everybody is to go to college. And when some people lose because of that, now it's that everybody's saying everybody has to go into the trades. And I think a lot of it is ideological against intellectuals in the universities more than um, a purely practical sense of view. And yeah, the economics of college are a problem. And I've gotten into videos about how to fix that because I think that does need reform, and tuitions are too high, but I think they're trending in the right direction now. So I think that problem is going to be inherently solved with the enrollment cliff, and the enrollment cliff is going to force education to adapt to be more valuable, provide things that students actually want to learn about, and make it at a level that's affordable enough that there's enough positive ROI for it to make sense. So that's seeing that affordability lifestyle I want is going to be very difficult. It makes me tempting to take huge risks when investing. Thoughts on this? It depends on what you're trying to start. I can't go into specific investment decisions, but that's the whole idea of financial nihilism, that like I can't get ahead conventionally, so I should just speculate and gamble on the highest risk things out there. But I generally don't believe that financial nihilism is an optimal solution. Like, if you want to take risk and make big bets, especially if in your 20s, make big bets on yourself. And your investments are more to help keep your wealth going a little bit above inflation in the long run, and take strategic swings for the fences when it makes sense, but not just to bet it all because you can't do that in your career. That's my take on that. What is your advice to young and new entrepreneurs? That's a very vague question. I did my whole video about how to get rich where I go into a little bit of it. I make more videos about entrepreneurship in general, but the thing I would say is that it will take you longer than expected and be a lot more expensive. Like, the lesson my entrepreneurship professors always taught me, and I've learned in the real world, is that it will always cost you 4 times as much as you expect and take you 4 times as long to hit your initial targets for your business. That's my take on it. And so I think the biggest key is grit and persistence is what you're going to need to be successful in whatever entrepreneurial venture you do. Is it rational not to invest time and effort into corporate careers going forward? It depends what your goals are, But I generally view corporate careers as like graduate school, except you're getting paid instead of paying the school. You are getting paid to educate yourself and develop the skills you need to either translate your human capital to being like more senior level person at a smaller firm of your expertise, or starting your own business. You can't count on 40 years of a golden watch at a mega corp, or just jumping between jobs in your industry, competing firms in your industry and moving up the ladder that way for 40 years. Um, that's what I think is not a good strategy. Um, the always upward doing better than your parents is just a fluke of history. No, I think that the millennials might be a negative fluke in history, actually. Um, with the cost of living rising, wouldn't mean more people are retiring at older ages? Um, yes and no, because there are certain jobs, like the trades are a good example of this. Like you just can't physically do them beyond a certain age because they are strenuous. Um, so you are forced to retire. There's also a lot of companies that fire senior management that's not like up at the very, very top or of ownership stakes. Senior level employees often are the first to get laid off because they're the highest paid. So you might be forced into retirement just due to layoffs and the fact there is corporate ageism being a real thing in the economy. And I did a video about corporate ageism uh, this January, actually, where I go into um, the real issues of like why companies tend to not hire older people, and if you are in that situation, what to do about it, because I think it's going to be a real problem that your corporate career might end before your retirement is planned. Um, but I think people will be able to work longer in more cognitive and white collar type jobs because it's not as physically demanding, but you have to be entrepreneurial and creative to stay relevant. People in the 30s, 19s had to move up in the middle class compared to their impoverished parents. Now people in the 30s are just still in the middle class. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like a lot of people who were born in the 80s and 90s, more of them grew up in the middle and upper middle classes. So that makes it harder to move up than the past. But if you structure your society correctly, it should be designed in a way that allows for upward social mobility. But you can't have stability and upward mobile sociability at the same time. Like, and that's kind of what people try to do, and that creates a lot of problems. Um, let's see. I'm going to scrolling down to see if what questions that I got. Um, do you think Mark Carney will make Canada great? No, I don't. Thoughts on different schools of economic thought: Keynesian, Chicago, and Austrian. Well, I generally have a sympathy for the Austrian school of economics in terms of like their policy solutions, and I think they do a good job of explaining the business cycle from a first principles perspective. My problem with Austrian economics is that they don't use any empiricism or data to prove their assumptions. If they just rely on praxeology, which is the idea of like I can just use like Greek style rationalist philosophical arguments to justify my economic theory without having to prove it in any way for data. And as somebody who likes to have some sort of evidence for my assertions, it makes me struggle with getting behind the praxeology. Um, Chicago, so I'd probably like say my personal economic views are somewhat of a mix between Chicago and Austrian. I like Chicago school because they are more free market, but they do try to prove it with data. I generally am skeptical of central banks and easy monetary policy, um, oftentimes, and have and Keynesian. I think the problem is it doesn't work in practice because Keynesianism requires governments to cut spending or raise taxes in economic good times and to make up for the facts when they stimulate the economy in bad times, but it usually works only one way. They never do the counter-cyclical part during the good times. They just only do stimulus perpetually, and that causes a lot of problems. And Keynesianism also gives too much credit to the government as the driver of aggregate demand in the economy, when the driver of the economy and particularly economic growth is the free market and individual choices. Um, let's see. Um, from listening to your podcast, I was surprised seeing you know about history, not just economics. Any history book recommendations? I mean, I have a lot of history book recommendations. It depends on what history you want to learn about. History and geography are my second and third favorite topics to read about other than economics and finance. So I try to integrate a lot of that into my content because I have a good knowledge base and I find it interesting. And I do have a whole reading book list where I do include a lot of history books, and you could get that by becoming a free member of the Substack. But I just don't remember them off the top of my head. Do you think Alberta will separate from Canada? I'm actually going to talk about that in a video I'm released, and I did discuss that in the speech in Toronto last week, my thoughts on all that. So that video will probably come out in a few weeks, and I'll give you my full answer. Do you have any rule of thumb for what percentage of your net worth your primary residence should be? No, I really don't. I think as long as you buy a house that is really like affordable within your budget, and what is affordable depends a lot on your individual circumstances. So I can't really go into it here. It's fine, but if your personal residence has gone up a lot and you don't have enough investments elsewhere, you might need to invest less in real estate and put your allocations more towards financial assets or other kinds of investments. What do you think about Mark Carney as Prime Minister of Canada? Will he be better for the economy than Canada? I mean, he might be marginally better than Trudeau, but I don't think he's willing to solve a lot of the structural problems of Canada. And I've discussed those in a video that I did a couple of years ago about that. I think Carney, though, does serve as a template to how Democrats can win back older voters in the United States and how center-left parties can win the over 55 crowd in other elections. Because he ran on a small c conservative platform, this idea that I'll keep the healthcare system, I'll keep all of the economic benefits, and I'll fight back against Trump. And like that was enough for him to win, was being a more status quo type candidate. But I mean, we'll see. I think he's more of a lesson for other center left parties in the world for their political strategies, but I don't think he'll be that successful. But again, it's too early. Let's see. Do you have any advice about how to get into a real estate company with some resources? And your question, robot art collector, is a little bit too like personal and touches on the investment advice category a little bit too much for me to talk about on a live stream. So if you would like to talk to me about that more specifically, schedule a time to privately talk to me. And I put in the link below. Let's see. Which city in the U.S. will be the new financial capital? I think the battle is between three cities right now. It's New York keeping that space, and then the other two that are competing against New York are Dallas and Miami. In terms of like corporate roles, Dallas might be winning out, and in terms of like high finance, like hedge fund, private equity, and like active like investment manager, like assets under management, it seems like Miami has the edge. So you could see like Miami be like the asset management new hub and Dallas be more the commercial banking hub. So that seems to be the two cities who are fighting over that spot right now. Let's see. Next question I have. Did you see Is It Bay Street? Yes, I did. I walked down it um, on my way to a lunch meeting that I had near Bloor Street, if you know where that is. Um, let's see. Is listening to Big Pokey considered parole? I've never heard of anything from Big Pokey, so I mean, it's not, I wouldn't I couldn't really tell you. When do you truly feel God's presence in life, in prayer or other situations? Um, I would say um, when I go to cathedrals is one, or very ornate churches. Um, Also, when I know that I've got a blessing that um, was better than expected in my life, whether personally or professionally, or also in hard times too, that I know that no matter what happens, I'll always have the Lord on my side. Um, and so it's when you're in like the, I don't know, the extremes of the human spectrum, or when you go to specific holy places, for me particularly Catholic cathedrals. um, let's see, what do you think people get right and wrong when discussing the effects of immigration on the economy? I think people get wrong is the idea that immigration is always a good thing, and that entrepreneurship, that you can't have a viable entrepreneur society without a lot of immigrants. I did a members only video where I go into this, called the myth of the immigrant entrepreneur, that goes into how I think the cause and effect on that trend is inverted. Um, yeah, I also think that um, the people also get wrong is that you can't is that you it's not impossible to have a restrictionist view on immigration, but at the same time also have want to bring in the top best and brightest people. Like, the main reason people don't like H-1Bs is not that we don't want immigrants that help make America a more prosperous country. The main reason people don't like H-1Bs is because a lot of companies are abusing it as a loophole to bring in people that undercut the base wages of American society. So I think if you had immigration that was not designed to basically cause the economic problems it generally does, which is increase housing costs and lower wages, then and you design immigration to bring in the skilled talent that is actually needed. And it's not just based on minimum education. It's either entrepreneurs who are building businesses, or anybody who could come. I'd find anybody coming to this country, if they can command a wage that's 20% higher than their American equivalent doing the same role. That's kind of a fair way to limit immigration to those who are creating a positive value over the marginal American doing the same thing. And like, the market is the signal that tells you that. Like, if employers are willing to pay this person more than an American, it means that they are legitimately better. I mean, there are countries like Singapore who have a similar system to that. And that's kind of my take on that whole thing. Who do you think the creator of Bitcoin is? Do you think the CIA created it? I have no idea, honestly. Um, I think it is kind of weird and pseudo religious, in the sense that there's this mythical creator for Bitcoin. But yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of theories on different people, but there's none of evidence to really definitively prove who Satoshi is. Considering aviation as a career 2.0, thoughts? I mean, do you like, as a pilot or an aerospace engineer, like, if it's something you're passionate about and you want to do, and the cost is not going to put you in crippling debt, uh, go for it, because the pay is generally pretty high in that space. But um, it really depends on your personal financial situation. How do you make sure the second or third generation of new money don't fall into vices or squander the money? I think that is very important for grandparents to be a very play a big role in the education of um, their kids' finances. Like, my grandmother was a very big influence in how I view finance. She was the one who actually taught me how to trade stocks, believe it or not. I probably wouldn't have gone into finance if it wasn't for my grandmother. She was also the one who taught me about good money management habits and savings habits and all that kind of stuff. And I think about this all the time because there's probably going to be a time that pretty soon that I have kids of my own, and I need to figure out how to, even as I get more successful in my career, figure out how to make sure that they have a good quality life and a better quality life that I did in my childhood, but also still stay motivated to try to do great things and push themselves to the next level. Um, this I'm not an expert in parenting, so that's why I try to defer on these. But that's kind of the question. That's kind of what I would say is I think the grandparents, because they're the ones who, if especially if it's a second or third generation, they're the ones who either made the money themselves or their parents were, so they have memory of starting from the bottom, and they could kind of reinforce that. Whereas the parents grew up privileged, it's kind of harder for them to do that situation. Um, yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Um, let's see. Um, all right. I don't know. Maybe we don't have that many questions. Maybe the economy isn't as bad as nostalgia as people think, and everybody's out going out to nice dinners tonight. So I know I try to avoid doing these on Fridays, but um, I'm traveling a lot, so this was the only time I could fit it in April for the live stream before I go back on the road. But I mean, I think I'll stay unless I'm going to stay on probably for. How was my time in Bocconi? It was fun. I was there for a semester. I took a lot of classes on international finance and international monetary economics. I learned a lot of interesting concepts there, such as the what's it called? Such as the impossible trinity, which I think is of central banking, which and the whole like concept of an impossible trinity is a very useful thought model and to understand the real concept of trade-offs. I learned a lot of interesting things like when I was there. I didn't think Milan was that interesting of a city though, to be quite honest. Like if you're not into the fashion scene and you're not into nightlife or shopping, it can get very boring in Milan very quickly. So I traveled a lot when I was there. I wrote a book called Off the Beaten Path when I was in college, which was a collection of my blog posts of when I lived in Europe, and visited a lot of the continent in the process. And the times I couldn't get away every weekend because I ran out of travel budget and or just had to focus on school, I kind of did get a little bit lonely and bored. But I did enjoy my experience at Bocconi. Um, and I will be going back to Milan for the first time since I was in Bocconi in 2027 as part of the European tour. So um, that is overall, I think, a positive experience. But I liked the school. I liked my time in Italy and exploring Europe. But I particularly am not a fan of Milan from like a living perspective. Um, Better placed for business networking, Palm Beach or Miami? I would say it's Palm Beach. Depends on what you want to do, though. I mean, with Miami, if you want to be involved in like international business, like the intersection of Latin American and US business and finance, you want to be in Miami. If you just want to deal with like local, like American wealth, then Palm Beach. And I think a lot of the Palm Beach County in general, I think, has a lot of wealth, and it's a lot of people. Usually, people are moving there. They're moving there for a reason to do something, or they've already made it. Whereas Miami has a lot more extreme inequality, and it attracts a little bit more of a transactional crowd that might make it a little bit more difficult for networking. But again, I've never lived in Florida. I've been to South Florida 3 or 4 times, each for relatively short stints. So take what I say with a grain of salt. Is 29 too late in life? Well, for what? I generally don't think it is too late in life. I mean, 29 was when I um, first, what's it called? When I first left my last corporate job and started my the full time entrepreneurship life was when I was 29. So yeah, it's usually a time to take risk and take chances in your life. You have enough experience that you can and that you and maturity that you won't really self sabotage as much as you would in your early 20s, but you're still young enough to have energy. Um, where have you traveled in Latin America? Any favorite cities? Oh, I've traveled all over Latin America. I've gone to Mexico at least 7 times. I've been to all Baja California. I've gone to Puerto Vallarta, Nueva Vallarta, Sayulita, Punta Mita, all that area. Gone to Guadalajara and Zapopan a couple times. I've been to Chiapas and Huatulco on the southern part of the Pacific coast of Mexico and to Cancun. That's my experience with Mexico. I've been to Guatemala. I've been to Panama. I've been to Cartagena in Colombia and to Chile, Argentina, and Uruguay. My favorite places to visit in Latin America, my favorite place was Punta del Este. It's I don't I haven't found many places similar to that in terms of like the experience of it. And I'm going to do another meetup, most likely in Punta del Este or the surrounding area, Jose Ignacio, as part of the international tour next year. I really liked Argentina too. Like Buenos Aires Polo Day was one of the best travel days of my entire life. Santiago and Los Condes was really fun too in Chile. I think the Southern Cone cities were my favorites that I went to in Latin America. Um, yeah, I mean, I also think Puerto Vallarta is my favorite Mexican city for vacation, which I'd put probably like up there with Chile maybe. But I mean, like I would say Punta del Este area followed by Buenos Aires were my 2 favorite places to visit in Latin America. Um, what is your read on the impact of AI in the marketing field in terms of jobs and role evolution? Well, I think it will automate a lot of the media buying roles and a lot of the more just spread out the word type of things. But I still think you'll need human creativity to supervise all of it. So I don't think the entire marketing industry will be automated. Any insight for getting economics related jobs, policy research, and data supply chain right now, finishing a master's in econ, but want to pivot? I mean, the way that the easiest way probably to do it is to start writing about economic issues. Like if you were working at a think tank and publishing them on like X or Substack or something like that. And then when you apply for jobs at think tanks, send your work that you have published as like a case study or a source of, hey, look, this is the kind of research I can do. I have some interesting ideas. I think I could be a valued member of the team. And you don't become a creator to make money being a creator. You become a creator to build a portfolio to sell yourself to work for one of these think tanks or institutions. So yeah, especially since you're finishing your master's, so you do have the academic qualifications already down. What do you think of Canada and its future? Do you see it becoming more integrated in the U.S.? You might see the western half of it become integrated into the U.S. because of the tension splitting up Canada, but it seems like whole Canada's national identity and their nationalistic pride is built on rebelling against the United States and not integrating with us, even though it probably would be the best thing for their economy and their society. They're having a big problem with young people who are strictly STEM degrees or people with high agency bailing on them and moving to the United States. So they probably should, but I think they're going to be heavily resistant to do it until economic forces force the matter eventually. Then there's the whole Quebec thing. I don't think Quebec could ever integrate with the United States for a variety of reasons. So if there is any sort of integration, Quebec would likely be excluded. Do you recommend REITs for people in their 20s who can't afford to buy an entire house yet? I mean, I think that REITs are a valuable part of most investors' portfolios who don't have large existing real estate exposures. But I'm not going to get more deep into that because, again, that sounds more like an investment advice question. Predictions for the future if there's a falling out between the EU and the US. Uh, yeah, there's a lot of interesting things that could happen in that environment. I think Germany would have to align. I think the EU would fracture more likely. I think there'd be some EU countries that stay loyal to the liberal international order in the US and some that align with China and Russia. Like, I think, for example, like Britain, Italy, Poland, probably Switzerland, if they'll still be neutral on paper, but they probably more lean towards the LIO. Spain and Portugal, when it's all said and done, maybe France, or I think like Germany would actually probably align more with the other side of things. I think you'd just see a fracture, like more than the whole block go the other way, because I mean there are certain countries whose geopolitical interests will still align with the U.S. and some that will not. The one that stands out to me that really doesn't align very well that's in the Western Bloc would be Germany, but there probably are others too. Do you see socialism becoming more mainstream in the U.S.? Yes, it already has become, unfortunately, mainstream in the U.S., and it's the biggest risk for the future of the United States, honestly. The U.S., they can't become just a better version of a welfare state like Europe. We can't outcompete them at that. We will just be sinking us down to the lowest common denominator. The U.S. has to be, if the U.S. is key driver of success, it's the best place for entrepreneurship and capital and economic opportunity for high agency people, the ambitious, and the investor class. And if America decides to betray those people and shift towards being like a European style economy, it will fail very quickly. There's a lot of reasons why I don't think the U.S. is well suited for that. One, that there's no U.S. to pay for the defense expenses of the U.S. like there is for paying for Europe's defense expenses right now. So there's a variety of other factors that will you come to the Bahamas? I would love to come to the Bahamas. There's just not enough demand yet from you guys. I'm going to post Paradise Island. Or if, Justin, you know of a better place I should do the meetup. I was thinking like Atlantis or Baja Mar or something like that. But if you have a better recommendation of where I should do it there, I would like to do it there as part of the Latin American tour if enough people are willing to come. And I will post it on the Eventbrite. And how I'm going to structure the international tours, I'm just going to post all the cities I potentially want. And basically, I will only I'll set it up so that like it won't transfer the payments to me unless if I set a hard date. Otherwise, I'll refund people by a certain point, but I need to have a certain set audience amount for it to make sense for me to go. But I would love to go to the Bahamas. It's on my bucket list in the top 10 countries I have left to go to. So let's see. What do you think of someone who's living their whole life in Berlin and aspires to move to California to be the most successful luxury realtor there? I mean, I think it's a good dream. California has a lot of luxury realtors, so you have a lot of competition. And so it might not, unless if you are a really good luxury realtor already in Berlin, it might not be the thing to do to move to California particularly. Like you probably want to be a luxury realtor in a place where a lot of people are moving that is just building its luxury real estate market, not one that's as saturated as California. How viable is getting a passport by investment to hedge against the U.S. downturn? It depends where you want to get it, but and I don't really know all the rules of that off the top of my head. So, and it depends on which country, because most countries, the U.S. sneezes, they'll catch a cold. So you have to find something that's not quoted at the U.S. and is a nice place to live. which is a very interesting combination. Probably a difficult combination to find. Um, let's see. If socialism damages the economy, what state would you rather be in and why? Like in the U.S. or just in the internationally? Because if like I don't know, I just generally am skeptical of moving out of states purely for economic reasons. If you're from California, it might make sense in New York, that and some of the northeastern states because there's climatic factors too. But yeah, I need more details. Do you have any tips for improving cognitive skills for young people entering the workforce? I would just say like mental math and just trying to practice that in your head is a good skill to have because it allows for like quick thinking and other methods too. I just think asking why and teaching yourself second order thinking, like I did in my video, asking like, and then what to anything. And then my video also about how to discern the truth is probably very helpful to that as well. Um, what's it called? What are your thoughts on financial audit and Caleb? Have you thought about doing any different formats for YouTube content? Is Caleb referring to Caleb Hammer, the guy who talks about people's bad finances and what he would do to fix them? Um, yeah. Um, I would say I'm probably not the guy to do that kind of style. I'd asked you guys actually on a post a couple days ago about what your thoughts on me for guests. Like, please leave in the comments like who's your my favorite guest speaker I've ever brought on this channel, or who would you like to bring on as a guest speaker on the channel. But in general, the reception I got from that is you seem to prefer just me talking independently and not having guest speakers. Uh, and so I see that just by the comments. I also see that by the ratings of interviews versus just me talking. So it needs to be somebody who's a subject matter expert who I think adds a lot to the conversation. Like I'll probably bring Chris Street back on later this year on the channel to see his update on what's going on here in California. I also might want to bring on Chris Adelmise back if I have a topic that's more options or vol focused. And yeah, and there's certain people. If I was going to bring on other YouTubers, it'd be more for debates, kind of like what I did with Malcolm Collins last year. And I think I also might want to do a debate with a friend of mine who's an emerging content creator about what responsibility do parents have to their children and adult children. Because I think a lot of people, particularly in like the pro-natalist type trad circles, are like, your responsibility is just to have a lot of kids, not to worry about whether how you're going to pay for their college or whether you're going to save for retirement or not. And I generally am on the opposite side of that point of view. Like, I think if you're going to bring kids into this world, and I am pro having big families generally, but if you had to bring kids in this world, you should bring kids in the world with the intention that you're going to set them up to live a better life than you did. And if you're not willing to do that, then that's, I think, kind of a little bit selfish and irresponsible. Um, that's my take on that. Yeah. And I've never watched Financial Audit, so I know really nothing about them. I don't really watch many other financial YouTubers. The only other financial YouTuber that I watch semi regularly is Patrick Boyle. And I think that he does a great job, and he's better at adding humor into his content than I am. Let's see. Like, you mean other U.S. states? Like, if the U.S. becomes more socialist, you want to move out of the U.S. entirely. I don't think moving to different states will just be like rotating chairs on the Titanic at that point, to really be quite honest. If you only had two options to become highly successful in the high-end retail estate industry, which one would you choose? USA, UAE, or Dubai? And if so, what US states? I mean, it depends on what kind of life that you want. Like, I don't really know enough about the Dubai real estate market, not necessarily about what the prices are, but like who's moving there, like how does like the industry work? Like, what is it like to be a realtor in Dubai? What are the rules? the regulations, how much of an old boys club it is. And because I don't know that kind of information, I really can't give you a straight answer for that question. I don't really know enough. Um, yeah, let's see. Would the UAE become the USA of the century? No, it will not. There's a lot of structural disadvantages about the UAE that will make it very difficult to do that. One is its size, it's relatively small. I think really if UAE's target is not to try to compete with the US, but it's to compete to be its region Switzerland. Um, I think also that the geopolitics in that region will have sort of more risk premium attached to it, and also the cultural divides of that region versus the West or other parts of the world may not be as stark as many other parts of the Middle East, but it will maybe cause some issues. And also the summers are super intensely hot. Um, like that's why I don't think Phoenix will ever. Phoenix has moved to become a big city, but I don't think it will become like New York or Los Angeles level global city. I think climate is part of the reason why. Um, what do you think will happen to small to mid-sized CPA firms due to the rise of AI? I mean, actually, you'll probably see more of them because it'll be easier for an individual to leave the bigger CPA firms and start their own. And I think you'll have less headcount at them and be able to serve more clients. So I think you'll have probably more small CPA firms, but less medium to large size CPA firms. That's probably the implication. Um, and you'll have lower headcounts across the board. Um, let's see. I'm going to scroll up because I think I missed a few questions in here. Let's see. Maybe I'm not missing any questions. It's just sometimes hard to read through these. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask them again because I'm not really, it just kind of, I'm not, yeah, I think a lot of them got retracted or something because I'm not seeing the questions that I thought I saw in here. Or maybe I just went through them too quickly. But, oh yeah, what's your daily dream car to drive that I would drive on a daily basis? Um, I mean, my dream is to not drive. I would like to have full on level 5 autonomous driving at all times. I don't have to drive. I could sit in the car. I can get work done or record a YouTube video or just relax. I am 80% of people think they're above average drivers. I'm one of the 20% who admits he's a below average driver. And I like the freedom. I don't like public transit in the US in the sense that I feel very constrained and not able to go where I want. I like the freedom of having my own car so I can go where I want when I want. But I don't, outside of like a racetrack, I don't actually like the practice of driving. So I would love to have a fully autonomous car. And if I can have a fully autonomous car of any make I want, it'd be probably like one of those Rolls Royces that are designed to be more comfortable to sit in the back than in the front of the car. Something like that would be pretty cool. At least for me now. Like maybe when I'm older and have a family, I would need like an SUV or something like that that can fit everybody. But that's probably what it would be like something a car that is like one of these luxury cars that are designed more for you just chilling in the passenger seat and let the car drive itself. Would be the answer to that question. Um, So let's see, if the US and the EU have prosperity without one another, since it seems to have economic symbiotic roles. I don't know. I think that more the EU is taking a lot more than the US than contributing. I mean, to be quite honest, in most of these countries, like a lot of them are, quite frank, a lot of them are open air museums at this point, and they have so much regulation and such bloated welfare states and such high taxes that it's like impossible to grow anything organically there. It's basically serves the interest of old money and tourists, a lot of the EU at this point. And that's like the EU, I think if they tend to have a split, might actually benefit their economy because it'll be a wake up call and be like, look, we're going to sink into the abyss unless if we reform our economy now. So that's one thing that might make it more symbiotic because they'll be forced to compete again with other developed countries versus just being able to rest on their laurels and get subsidies from other developed countries. But yeah, I mean, I don't really think the EU and the US are going to break off because they have not all of the countries in the EU, but enough of them have similarly aligned geopolitical interests to the US. So if it does break off, it'll be at a piece by piece level. Do you think they are destroying California on purpose, or is it really just incompetence? I think it's incompetence, and it goes to my theory about the prosperity theory of politics, where basically, when American politics, what happens, you have a city, you have good policies that incentivize growth in that city, and you have a lot of business owners who move to that city. But then the problem really ultimately is that because the city becomes so successful and is growing so rapidly, it attracts a lot of the people who will vote for counterproductive policies, whether that's underclass people voting for social welfare, younger people voting for more progressive policies out of idealism, etc. And the city like doesn't mind because the moderate voter in the city doesn't mind because they're like, hey, look, we're doing so well, we can afford to give a little bit back and help those in need and blah 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 blah. But then over time, the demographic profile, the voting profile changes that basically this impulse, the left leaning economic impulse has no check. And so they will get what they want and they will hamper the city down so it's no longer competitive. And so the businesses that are there will move out. And a lot of businesses that would have started there no longer can because of the bad policies. So they do it in other locations. And then the city struggles, the crime goes up, there's a lot of economic issues. And then it gets so bad that people realize, hey, wait, we can't run ourselves to the ground anymore. And so then that city will vote in a way that actually fixes the problem. The thing that's frustrating about this is that as somebody who has more like free market or like less instinct towards social welfare and way more willing to be tough on crime, the only way people will ever actually agree with you is if the city fails. And this is like what happened with Michigan, for example. Detroit was the fourth biggest city in America. It was the wealthiest metro in the area. It was the center of technology at the time. They passed a bunch of policies that Detroit and Michigan that made it uncompetitive. And so people moved out. The city crashed. And it took 50 years to make Michigan politically competitive again as a response to people realizing that you can't keep doing bad policies all over again. And now California is kind of in that part where I think people are going to start to, because it's not working anymore. And so people are going to start to try to vote more practical economic policies in, but we're probably year one. This is going to be a 20-year process that California adjusts to become more competitive. And now you're going to start to see other cities that now are the hot growth cities that are going to weigh themselves down, like Charlotte and Atlanta and Austin. are probably going to repeat the mistakes that California and the Rust Belt made. This is like a cyclical issue. Well, why would manufacturing move out of there to the south? There's a reason why it moved. It wasn't just because of market forces don't just randomly move out of a place. Detroit made it uncompetitive for them to stay, and Michigan broadly made it uncompetitive for them to stay. So that's why. But yeah, that's kind of the problem. What do you think? What are your 3 favorite and most livable cities for you personally in the U.S.? I mean, my favorite city is Newport Beach, California. I'm very biased, of course. That's why I live here. But outside of coastal Orange County, California, that's number 1. Number 2, I would say, is like north central San Diego County. So like Mission Beach or like Bankers Hill area in San Diego up until like Carlsbad. That's a pretty nice area too, like as well. If I was more had a preference for smaller towns, like and didn't really care about airport access, Charleston, South Carolina is pretty nice. I like West Palm Beach, Florida, and like the Palm Beach County area in Florida. Um, I prefer California for climatic reasons and familial reasons and a variety of other ones, but that would be one. If I had a place to escape in the summer, like for winter only, Scottsdale, Arizona is pretty nice. Summers are a little bit unforgiving there. Um, that like those are for me personally, but in terms of most livable cities, it depends what you mean by most livable, like the mix of like cost of living and climate and job opportunities and taxes. Like, yeah, I mean, it's very different for different people, but like I would say the most livable places are coastal California. I think a lot of the Pacific Northwest, if you don't mind rain, is pretty livable. Um, I would also say that Florida and the Carolinas are pretty livable too. And if you don't mind snow, New Hampshire is probably pretty nice, and Maine. But I mean, I don't. I mean, I haven't lived in. I've only lived in like 3 different states in America. So, and I've traveled a lot of these places from a tourist perspective, and I know about their economies. But people have different priorities than me. I tend to really care about weather. So I am willing to pay more to live in a warmer climate, and not just a warmer climate, but one that's not too hot, more Mediterranean climate. So that heavily biases me towards California. And I think Orange County within coastal California is the most culturally compatible with me personally. So I like it here. Again, I think San Diego, Orange County, if you're more progressive leaning, there are some parts of the Bay Area that can be pretty nice, like Los Gatos and some of the nicer suburbs in the peninsula and San Jose area or Marin County. But I don't culturally fit in very well with those places. But if you're on that side of the aisle, those places are very nice, but they're also very expensive. Same with some suburbs on the east side of Lake Washington and Seattle can be pretty nice too. Florida, if you don't mind humidity or very high heat, I think Palm Beach, Florida, and that area is really a good place to live. South Carolina, Greater Charleston can be a good place to live. And if we're cold, like New Hampshire is probably a good place to live. You're still close to Boston, but you don't have a lot of the tax and regulatory issues that Boston has. And Connecticut can be nice too, actually. The Gold Coast of Connecticut. But yeah, I mean, and actually the city I really like, if it wasn't for the cold, would be Chicago. Chicago is a fun city. I always time going there in spring or summer because it's just too cold the rest of the year. But if it wasn't for the weather, I think I could live in Chicago. So it's the most affordable city relative to the amount of cultural amenities that you have in it. And it's walkable. It's got good food. It's got a lot of fun things to do. Um, yeah, I think Chicago is a very underrated city as well. Um, let's see. Um, yeah, do you think a port city is needed for success? Um, Not necessarily. Like Dallas isn't a port city, and it's very. I mean, it's a rail hub and an airplane hub, airport hub. Like, but in terms of like a naval port, no. It's inland. So I think the existence of Dallas as a successful city um, is like proof of concept. A lot of if you're a government capital, you don't need to be on a port either. Like example would be like Beijing. It's not really a port city. Berlin is not really a port city. Paris isn't a port city. Um, but those are government capitals, so that's kind of why I think Paris actually I think would be successful whether it's a government capital or not. But that's another example of a city that's reasonably successful that's not a port city. Um, do you believe in the concept of demographics as destiny, or AI and robotic automation can offset this? I think that AI and automation debunks the demographics as destiny. In fact, a lot of countries that previously had good demographics are not going to look so good when they have a bunch of overeducated and underemployed people because of AI. So, yeah, I think pre AI, I would have been more of a believer in demographics is destiny, but now I'm not. And it's a technological thing. When the delta between the most technologically advanced countries and the lesser technology advanced countries narrows, demographics is whoever has the bigger demographics is the winner because everybody has an equal playing field of technology. But when the technological gap between the most advanced countries and the lesser advanced countries widens, then it doesn't play anymore. That's how Europe was able to colonize the world from the 15th to the 20th century, was because they had a widening technological advantage up until World War II. Uh, and we might be going to an era now that there will be a few smaller countries that may not have a lot of population, but they have major technological advantages, and they will use that to punch way above their weight geopolitically. So, yeah, that's my take on that. Um, let me see. Do you know any areas that have a good amount of traditional Catholics? I mean, there's a traditional Catholics all over America, really, except for like, I mean, the deep South is generally not a very strong Catholic community, but you could find like a good Catholic communities in most of America. You could find it in Southern California, particularly where I live, has a lot of trad Cath communities. I'm not part of like what be like a TLM trad Cath community personally, but I know that they exist and they're thriving. Um, I would say that you have some in the San Francisco Bay Area. There's a lot of them too. You have them in like Chicago, DC, Dallas, and has have them. I think Houston does, and Florida, New York. And there might be some in New England too, but just basically the places that have historically sizable Catholic populations have have trad populations. So, like the Northeast, Great Lakes region of the Upper Midwest, Omaha, Nebraska, and California, and Texas and Florida, where I would look. Like basically, generally, a good proxy is where there are WCC and Big East schools. If you're familiar with college basketball, are probably the places you should look, and the surrounding country rural areas. Um, do you think the Southwest water shortage will be a bigger factor in the future? No, not really, because I think water in the and if you're a developed country, the any modern water problem is a political problem. It's not a natural resource problem. With You have desalination technology, we have the ability to build reservoirs and other infrastructure to capture more of the existing rainwater and snowpack than we do now. It's just that these things are expensive to build politically, and they often are environmentally damaging or have a lot of vested interests don't like them for NIMBY reasons or other reasons. Like I'll literally go out and say, and I think I'm going to make a short about this called "There is no such thing as a drought." In a developed country, a drought is a political question. Like there are places with a lot less water in the world, like all the Gulf states and Israel, that have their drinking water and all entirely from desalination, or the vast majority of it. And we could do the same thing. You can build a ton of desal plants all across the coast in California and ship that to Vegas and Arizona if the economics and the political will was there. It's really simple. I'm not really worried about it at all. It's all politics. And like you hear about in California all the time, you literally like 10 years ago drained all the reservoirs out to preserve some fish called the delta smelt, because the water is getting a little bit too salty for it to live. And then when you had a few years without rain, it's like, oh no, our reservoirs are empty. The drought, yeah, because you drained a lot of them because to preserve the delta smelt, and a lot of it's the farmers arguing the with the rest of the state and who should get water, because the farmers are growing very water intensive crops in a dry place in Central California. And again, I'm not really saying we shouldn't have farming. California makes a lot of our produce, and it's one of the most productive agricultural areas in the entire world. Like most of the fruit you guys are probably eating, if you're American, comes from Central California. But I think the solution is to build more water infrastructure and not to ration it and use it as a political battling point. So, and like that's my take. There are solutions to this. It's just the political will isn't there. And if it really is a problem, the political will all of a sudden will be there. Um, that's my take. Do you think Dubai's tourist kind of recover after these events? I think it'll recover. I just don't know how quickly it will be. Like I wanted to do a meetup in Dubai for the channel next year. And if I had enough audience for it, I also probably would have gone to Cairo and Israel and maybe even Turkey. But the problem is that now with all this geopolitical stuff, I think I would hold off on that. And you need at least a couple years of stability. Like I think it'll be a U-shaped recovery. Like you're going the down person right now, and it'll stay flat for a while until people feel secure and they're like, you know what? It's not going to be the end of the world. There's not going to be another strike anytime soon. Get back to normal. And I think it will recover quickly at that point. But I don't think it'll be a V where it's immediate. I think it's going to be more of a U-shaped recovery for Dubai's tourist economy. So that's my take on that. Let's see. What do you think of the concept of the bezel, coined by John Kenneth Galbraith and Hyman Minsky's theories about debt accumulation? Yeah, I think there's some legitimacy to it. I think it's just kind of part of the Austrian business cycle that there's more credit out there than there's not enough returns on the credit out there to pay back the interest on the debt, and that's what causes economic contractions. And like when money is easier and people are more desperate for investments, they are more susceptible to the bezel and fraud and other issues like that. So I think there is some validity to it. On the other hand, does the EU buy a lot of US bonds? Yeah, but they're not nearly the biggest buyers of US bonds are other countries or US based financial institutions like insurance companies and banks and investors, I think. So let's see. Do you see Vietnam as a major player in Southeast Asia as their economy is growing rapidly? Yeah, they are. They're rapidly on the rise. I did a whole video about the economic future of Vietnam. What you invest in real estate in the developed world? I don't really invest in real estate in the developing world personally. I don't really know what you're asking there. But the technology gap between the US, EU, and everyone else is so much narrower now than 100 years ago. Why would the technology gap widen? Well, it's been widening since 2023 when ChatGPT came out because like AI and robotics are not advancing unilaterally across the world. In fact, the US's gap versus the EU is widening because the EU is slow to the party or not the party at all in terms of embracing these kinds of technologies. So, yeah, that's why. Um, all right, I'm gonna do 10 more minutes of this live stream before I go because I don't want to lose my voice. At what age do you think living with your parents becomes parole? Um, I think it depends where you live and why you are doing it, to be quite honest. But like, if you're not like, if you're living with your parents like to save money because you're building a business and you need to like keep your costs down to do that, then I don't really see as much of an issue with it. But if you're just somebody who's just like bumming around or has a normie job, like 9 to 5 type thing, it's probably over 25 would be the answer. Um, do you still follow baseball? I seen the Padres were bought by private equity today. Thoughts? I mean, I follow baseball a little bit. The Angels need to be above 500 after Labor Day for me to really start caring again. But in terms of the Padres being bought by private equity, um, I don't really know who is it like a private equity manager who's a baseball fan, or is it actually bought by like a firm? I need to know more details. Um, what's it called? Do you manage some friends' money with Spearhead? How do you feel? Um, I have many wealthy friends and passionate about wealth management. Oh yeah, a lot of my clients are friends of mine, or they've become before they became clients, and others of them have become friends of mine after they've become clients. So it kind of works both ways. And as long as like your incentive structure is built in a way that your interests are aligned with your clients, you're not going to have any issues with that. And I don't really have any issues with that because the way our firm is structured is that we only do well if like we the like there's our let's say we do well, like we are fully incentivized for our clients to succeed. Like we're not incentivized to take too much risk, or um we're not in and if we do better, our clients do better, our we do better, and if our clients do worse, we do worse financially. So, and we have no like, conflicts of interest or anything like that. So that's why I'm not really worried about it. Um, let's see. What is conspiracy you believe, financial or otherwise? I mean, there's a lot of them that I would believe. Maybe I should do a live stream about that whole topic. But um, I generally think that there is a lot of things that are done for reasons that are not. I think the whole BS job theory is interesting to me. I don't know if I agree with it entirely, but there is some validity that a lot of jobs are created mainly just to fulfill social roles in a society. Um, yeah, I also think um, there are certain financial conspiracy theories that go on, but like and I think they're more common in finance because there are less people that need to know about it for it to be executed. Basically, the problem with conspiracy theories is the more people who need to be involved with executing it, the harder it is to keep a secret, which makes me skeptical um, of most conspiracy theories. Um, do you have any advice to dealing with imposter syndrome on your first job out of college? Um, I don't know. I had a tough time with that my first job out of college. You just have to accept that, like, you may not be as good as somebody more experienced or as ready, but you just need to just educate yourself to make sure that you're not at least at a knowledge deficit. And then the thing is that you're not going to, the thing is that you shouldn't worry about too much because it's going to be reflected in your pay. Like if you're somebody who's less experienced, you'll just have lower comp than somebody who's more experienced. So you belong there, but you're not at the top level yet. You're just in the game, and this is your chance to be in the arena and compete. And just think of it like now it's like your chance to play. Like it's like a sports team. Like you're not on the bench anymore. Do you think the GOP is going to lose the midterms? Yeah, I mean that's that. Even before Iran, that was kind of a done deal for a variety of reasons. Like it would be basically a political miracle if the Republicans somehow kept the House. I still think there's a chance they could keep the Senate though, but I think the chance that they keep the House is extremely low um, at this point. Do you think betting should be legal nationwide, like gambling in general, casino, sports betting? Um, yeah, I mean, I can see kind of both sides on it, to be quite honest. On one side, like people are going to probably do it anyway, and you don't really want to have to keep all that stuff underground. But on the other side, like now with it all legalized, you're seeing how many young men are ruining their lives through legal sports betting and all this other kind of stuff. And even back when casinos were relatively harder to access, you had to go to like Vegas or Atlantic City or the Indian casinos in remote areas. It caused a lot of problems too. So yeah, I really don't know what to think about. I don't have a strong conviction on that. Um, do you think voting for a third party is a waste? Um, it's depends. It's only a waste if you would not be satisfied with either two candidates winning. Like I voted for third parties for two elections in my life for president because I was not really satisfied with either of the two candidates. Um, and then I just voted for the party I normally vote for down ballot in those elections. So it also depends where you live. Like if you live in a state that the outcome is kind of predetermined anyway, you have a lot more flexibility to vote on principle. Whereas if I lived in a battleground state, I would be less willing to vote third party because it makes a more bigger impact on the margin. Um, let's see. I think that I'm going to. I don't see any more questions, so I think I'm going to wrap up. Um, what's it called? Why is Orange County, San Diego, the more conservative leaning compared to other parts of California? I think it's who migrated there. Like Orange County and San Diego originally was populated by more conservative leaning people from the Midwest or Central California or military people. And so it developed a more conservative culture. Um, a lot of defense contractors moved in their areas originally in aerospace, which also brought more of a conservative culture. And it's also been a hub of entrepreneurship, Orange County particularly. Um, whereas the people who moved to LA and San Francisco are more progressive leaning people from the Northeast, particularly New England and New York. And so I think that has something to do with it. And yeah, it's also Orange County tend to be a hotbed of a lot of modern Christian movements. Like the whole concept of the mega church really kind of was established originally, I think it's Southern California, and it spread out from there. Um, And yeah, it was also a relatively wealthy and suburban place. It's not as high density. Historically, wasn't as high density as other places of similar levels of population. That has changed a little bit in modern times, but that's where like a lot of the historically conservative areas have been. Can Sacramento ever get as big as LA and San Francisco? Probably not. Sacramento is basically carried by the state government. Like there's not really much of a private sector economy there. Um, it's, but that's my take on it. Um, let's see. But I think I'm gonna wrap it up. I'm getting a little bit tired. I'm still a little bit jet lagged from the East Coast, and I thank you guys all for coming on this live stream, and thank you guys for watching.